in the EdCamp documents. So our outcomes for today are to define blended and personalized learning and identify its hallmarks. I think once you hear the definition, you'll realize that you probably have already done some of this in the past. You'll establish a rationale for using blended and personalized learning to better reach all learners. And then if we have time, we'll reflect on how to implement BPL strategies in your own classes or encourage teachers in your building to utilize them in theirs. So I say if we have time because you'll have access to this presentation. In fact, Brittany, if you don't mind to go ahead and put the link in the chat now so that if you want to access any of these resources, you are welcome to. Anything in here you're welcome to use. Steal, you do not need to give us credit. A lot of times we do the same thing. So feel free to use any of this and use it as you see fit. So one of my favorite ways to describe blended and personalized learning is the fact that it's a disruptive innovation. And we think about the word disruptive as being a negative, right? Like sometimes disruption is a negative and it causes us trouble. But when you think about things such as email, TurboTax, stores like Target, these were each disruptive to a current system. So email disrupted the US Postal Service, TurboTax disrupted H&R Block, and Target disrupted stores like Macy's. However, they ultimately helped improve everyone, right? Because these new innovations create a little bit of competition. Online learning has improved over the years, and it's given opportunities to students who potentially may not have had some of those opportunities, and it's paved the way for blended learning to kind of march its way into a typical brick and mortar school. So the disruption, blended and personalized learning isn't always easy. It isn't always neat. Sometimes it can appear chaotic, but it's definitely something that we believe will create competition in a positive way and create growth for teachers and students.
Wonderful. So when we talk about what blended learning is, it's an education program in which a student learns at least in part through digital learning with some element of student control over time, place, path, and or their pace. And so the three biggest hallmarks of blended and personalized learning are incorporating student voice, student choice, and then personalizing the learning experience for each individual student. And so we have to think about how do we get to know our students and their needs in a way that is going to influence not only how we plan for them, but also how they're going to participate and engage within that learning. And so we'll get more into detail in that in the next few slides.
All right. So if you look back at the previous slide, I'm going to pull it up again. Thinking about what's underlined, right? Digital learning, student control over time, place, path, and pace. Regardless of if you wanted to, my bet is that over the past couple of years, you've implemented some blended learning strategies through COVID and the pandemic. So I just would like for you to reflect for a second on what elements of blended and personalized learning that you currently already use in your classroom. If you'd like to share those in the chat, we'd love to hear them. If you'd like to come off of mute and share it, that would also be great, but I understand it's a professional day. But if there's anything you'd like to share, great. Regardless, we would ask you to just kind of reflect on that in your own mind as we move forward in the next few slides.
So this is perhaps my favorite piece of discussing blended and personalized learning because it really focuses on the why. And the why isn't why we should use blended and personalized learning. The why is why we should change the way students have been taught over time. And so this continuum really speaks to the heart of BPL. So if you're able to see the far left box, the light blue box says that everyone reads the same content, uses the same process, moves at the same pace, and completes the same task. And so when we think about our high school experience, right, we remember for the most part, our desks were all in the same, facing the same direction in those long rows. There wasn't much group work, right? Everyone was assigned the same pages to read, the same essay to write, the same due date, the same checklist. And so we know that while this process has benefited some of us because some of us went through that, and here we are being successful today. We know that there were students who were unfortunately left behind because that didn't quite meet their needs. And so as we think about BPL, we want to start to move along this continuum here. And so we want students to regularly have choice in the content that they're learning, right? In the process that they go through. So maybe students aren't taking the same steps as everybody in their classroom to reach the same outcome. The pace, maybe you have staggered due dates for certain students. And then the product, maybe not everyone has to write an essay. Maybe some students can do a presentation, some students can do a podcast, but they're able to incorporate not only their choice, but their voice within the learning. And so BPL helps us to meet our students where they are and to elevate their learning and thinking because they know that the planning has been intentionally prepared to meet their needs. So as a result of that, it obviously is going to boost their engagement with their ownership because they know that they have choice in producing the product that is going to be the best representation of their skill set. And then it allows us to have student-centered classrooms. So students are more involved in the learning and thus, their performance is obviously much better as a result. So this continuum is just something to come back to and pay attention to because again, we want to move along it, not to say that every day in our classroom is going to be that dark blue box on the right, because that's just not feasible. But ultimately, we do want students to regularly have choice within the classroom.
Brittany. So this next slide, and again, we've already shared that you have access to this presentation. I saw that Brittany put it in the chat. So one of the things that I think made our PDO course a little bit different, and even this presentation, not to brag on Brittany and I, but we actually did all of these things. And so a lot of times you hear about PD where someone sharing something that they've never actually put into practice. But we have done that. So what we've given you are just some of the presentations that came in either from us. So there's something down here from me. Brittany has the path card, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next few slides. And then we have some teachers' assignments that they created while they were in our class. So for example, I love this one by Lisa Runyon. She did a thematic tasting menu. And so the students chose a full course meal, so to speak. And then she gave them directions within while also providing a lot of choice. So for the appetizer, they had to choose at least 3 of the pictures and answer the following questions. The main course, choose at least 1 of the readings and answer the following questions. And then the dessert menu. So they got to choose 3 of those. So you can see how the students have a lot of freedom within these parameters of the assignment. It also gives you more freedom as the teacher to provide an assignment, maybe where students then share out. So some of these assignments you'll see are maybe a little bit overwhelming because you're going to think, oh my gosh, I can't do that. It's so difficult. This is where we would encourage you to go over here to file, make a copy, and then just take out her directions and add your own content. So this is just one example. You will have access to all of these assignments. And again, if you would like to make a copy of any of it, share it with anybody, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, and so when we talked about the definition of blended and personalized learning, one of the things that we talked about was getting to know our students. That's how we're able to personalize the learning experience. And so Nicole and I have actually used this Google form in our BPL class to get to know our teacher students. And so what this form does is it asks students very specific questions, not just do you play a sport or what's your favorite color, but it actually asks them about their learning process. So for example, do you learn better with music or in silence? Do you want to process information before you talk, or do you prefer to talk to process? And so the idea behind this is that you collect this information from students and then use it intentionally in your planning. So maybe you plan the menu, for example, that Nicole just put up around your student interests. Maybe part of that menu is that they have to talk to somebody, but you incorporate their choice in how they want to engage in discourse within that menu. And so it really does mean that you have to take time to get to know your students more intentionally and on a deeper level. And then it also means that you're actually pulling up this survey as you're planning. One thing that we do know about teenagers, though, is that they're fair weather, right? And then they're still trying to figure themselves out. So this week they might learn better with music, but next week they may learn better in silence. And so the thinking behind this survey is not that you just give it once and that's it for the school year, but that you constantly revisit it and students are able to update and adjust their learning styles as necessary. We've also included a link here. So if you see that little Google form image at the bottom, you'll be able to click that and it'll take you to the actual survey that we've used in our BPL class. But then you're able to also make a copy of it and you can take out any questions that you don't feel are relevant or add any questions in. But we do believe that this is a wonderful resource to help you get to know your students for more intentional planning.
Brittany. So these are just some of the core aspects of BPL. Like we've already mentioned a few times, you likely have used several of these as you've been planning just kind of naturally over the past couple of years in particular. But BPL is going to ask you, if you choose to do BPL assignments, it's just going to ask you to be a little bit more deliberate in the way that you plan for those students. So for time, we all, I think, have fluidity and due dates lately. We've been calling it grace. Flipped classrooms had kind of their day in MCPS, but what we noticed is that, of course, as we know, some of our students are not able to access those things at home. And so using kind of flipping the classroom in your classroom is something that has been working fairly well. For PATH, giving students choice in learning activities and providing choice in the product when possible. MCPS, at least for English, is really great at that. And they make it clear that everything doesn't necessarily need to be an essay. Brittany mentioned a podcast, a presentation, things like that still help the students meet the standard and can show that they've mastered that content without necessarily having to write the essay. For PACE, again, we mentioned fluidity and due dates. And then moving through units based on mastering a concept, right? And so for a student who potentially already knows a pretty good bit of what you're already doing, would have some options in how to extend their learning instead of, I hate to say wasting, but using that time to do something they already know about. And then for PLACE, as always, we love to provide students opportunities to learn in real world settings, using the media center, setting up different spaces for students to learn. So things like more comfortable spaces, things that allow students to stand up. I have a standing desk here behind me that I like to use. And so just being a little bit more considerate of how our students learn best. I think that one of the perks of COVID was that we really as a system have put a lot of emphasis on social emotional learning, and blended and personalized learning really lends itself to that. Okay, so we're going to give you a couple of examples for writing and reading. I love to use blended and personalized learning when we're writing. I think it lends itself very well to writing because students rarely, at least in my class, are always in the same point in the writing process. So one of the ways that we really like to provide some flexibility is through narrative stations. And then I use, oops, sorry, I'm moving a little too quickly. I use a copy of Brittany's path card. And so what I do is I ask students to reflect on what they complete each day based on all of these slides that kind of give them an opportunity to work. So most of them always start at the last station, which is writing the narrative. There's also teacher feedback. There is a peer feedback station. There's a grammar station, dialogue. This was for a narrative. So it was something that I knew that students needed based on their rough drafts. The reason why I love the station card is that it gave the students some accountability. I had one student who wrote, I snapped a picture of it actually because I thought it was so funny. He wrote, I really didn't do anything today and I'm going to do it tomorrow. Right. And so that's actually what he wrote out. And so that gave me a little bit of something to go on, because I would write them messages each day like, okay, thanks for being honest, but now you're a day behind. Right. So this is something that you need to get completed by a certain, sorry, we still have our bells going, by a certain date. And so it allowed me to kind of monitor what was happening as the students were working. And if we got to the end and the assignment wasn't done, I had this whole document where we could go back and say, okay, where did you lapse? Where did the problem kind of start or end? So it definitely gives the students a little bit more accountability, I think, which is always a perk for teachers, I believe. And then next we have some examples for reading.
So in the same vein, as Nicole said, students, they are often at different points in the writing process. Well, one thing to consider is that even with reading, we have so many different reading levels within one classroom. At Gaithersburg, for example, our students are in all honors for English classes, which means that we know that we have, very low readers and then very high readers. And so sometimes it's unfair to say, okay, well, we're going to read pages 1 through 10 in class today, because for your more avid and proficient readers, they may want to go beyond that, right? So again, this really gets back to the heart of knowing our students and giving them choice. And so some of these bullets that you may see here kind of speak to different stations that you could have, or different ways that you could rotate students through them. So you might have an independent reading group for your more proficient readers, and then a small group for students who are in the middle, and then a teacher-led reading group for students who need a bit more support. Or you also just provide students with the choice of which group they want to be a part of, because sometimes even your most proficient readers still want to be in their teacher-led group. And so you're giving students choice, and then you're also giving them choice in the task that they're completing with their reading. So maybe some students are analyzing a significant passage, or others are looking for literary techniques. But the path card that Nicole just put up and talked you through with writing also lends itself to this. Because if you have students gearing up for like a common writing task, or just whatever that summative assessment is at the end, they can have choice in the stations that they're going to visit to help get them there. And so each student doesn't have to be assigned the same reading station. So they can get choices. And then at the end, as Nicole said previously, they reflect on their process. So maybe some students skipped certain stations and they earned a D or a C. And then you have the opportunity to kind of go back with them and make them reflect on, well, maybe if I wouldn't have skipped this station, maybe if I would have spent a little bit more time analyzing the passage, then my final assessment would have been, more detailed. And then those are choices that they can make differently moving forward. I think that one of the things that becomes hard with BPL is understanding that our students are new to kind of making choices. Again, they've been told throughout their educational career, this is what you're going to do. Everybody turn this in. This is how we're going to do it. Even when we give them formulas for writing, right? That's telling them how they're going to do something. And so now that we're giving them choice, a lot of them will make the wrong choice. They'll think that they know themselves. We know that they're still learning and growing, so they don't. And we have to be okay sometimes with allowing them to make the wrong choice, and then reflect on why that choice was not so great for them moving forward. And so again, that's hard for us to step back, because we always want to be there to support them and sort of save them, for lack of a better term. But we have to watch them fall sometimes and then be there to help pick them back up. So that's something to think about in regard to like using the path card and creating these sort of stations. Is you can't always be there to say, Nicole, don't pick that station. Have to let Nicole make her choice, make the wrong choice sometimes, and then learn from that.
Brittany. So on this slide, we have some resources. If you're not an English teacher, we realize that a lot of our examples so far have been English, but like Brittany mentioned, when we taught the PDO course, the last couple of sessions, we opened it up to all disciplines in secondary, I think, except for math. We didn't think we could handle any math people in there. No offense if you're math, but I mean, it wasn't going to work. We have some examples of varied disciplines if you would like to access that. And then please, before you leave, fill out the attendance and evaluation form that's linked in the presentation. I know that that was a really quick session. I know that you have another one probably at 10:30, so I wanted to make sure that you had some time to get there. But Brittany and I are in the county, obviously. Our emails are on this slide down at the very bottom. We would love to hear from you if you have any questions about blended and personalized learning. We'd love to come in and co-teach. Well, I'll volunteer myself for that. Brittany's a little bit busy and important for something like that, but I would love to come in and help you plan something, co-teach something with you, or even just come in and help you problem solve anything that maybe doesn't go your way the first time. So we really appreciate you coming to our session. We love talking about BPL, which you probably realized, and we would love to hear from you if you continue to have any questions about BPL.
Thank you so much, everyone. We hope that this was helpful. And like Nicole said, we know it was like bite-sized, but there's a wealth of information that we have to share. If any of you are interested, please reach out to us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye, thank you.